Okay, that's working. So I noticed my wife's Lumix camera, and I thought, okay, that's pretty good. That's got some interesting shapes and some interesting challenges that are posed when we want to build something in CG. So the first things first, if you want to model something in CG, you want to find reference. You either want to take the photos yourself, or you want to scour the internet and find as much reference as you can. Now, I know you're doing a Mars base, and so there's a limited amount of Mars bases in real life to actually look at, but you can look at movie Mars bases. You can look at lots of other mechanical stuff that will appear on a Mars base. Like some of the so the VFX students doing photography, they've been taking photos of things like air conditioning units and control panels and stuff like that. That's all great stuff for Mars base. You start putting that stuff on your Mars base, it's just going to look that much more realistic. But the gist of it is, you need to be taking photos, or you need to be finding reference as much as possible. So I got my wife's camera and I took a whole bunch of photos. I tried to be fairly sort of strict and sensible and take some 3/4 angles so I can just get a sort of an overall view of it. And I also wanted to try and take some more front-on top kind of view and then a view from behind. So I got most of the angles on this kind of covered. Now I need to look at this, and I really need to break this stuff down and develop a plan of attack before I even start using Maya at all. In fact, having said that, I'm going to start Maya because it takes a good 15 minutes these days to actually just load up. So let me just start that. 2018, remember? So I look at this, and what I'm looking for is, what are the big basic shapes in this camera? And how can I break those down and tackle them one at a time when I'm modeling, so that a complicated task becomes more manageable? So there are a bunch of basic shapes here. Let me just create a new layer and I can scribble over it and show you. So when I look at this, let's find the front bit, yeah. The biggest and the two biggest obvious shapes are, whoops, you know, the actual body of the camera that has this sort of wedge shape sort of cut out of it, this kind of ramp bit. Another important thing to look at that immediately stuck out when I was looking at this is that it's got a line across here as well. So even though all of this follows like forms the body of the camera, I can kind of further break it down and think, well, at some point I'm going to need to break this up just here. And then obviously the other big obvious one is the lens. The lens of the camera. So there's really only two big shapes to be noticed here. Then you've got a bunch of other shapes here. These kind of switches. If I look at another viewpoint, let's look at this 3/4 viewpoint. Got some more stuff on the back actually. In fact, the back view, this 3/4 back view is probably, well, yeah, it's just as useful, I guess, as the sort of front-on back view. But this shows that there's more stuff going on in the back. So even though we've got this main kind of capsule shape here, that's going to form the main body of the camera, it's further broken up into this bit here that sort of attaches and then this screen. So the screen forms another kind of shape. You've got this interesting kind of arrangement here, this kind of grip. And on the back view, you can actually see, you know, this kind of interesting shape here. So initially I would look at this and go, okay, this is one shape. So as you'll see when I start to model this, I start off with this as being just one object, one shape. But then I can go back to my reference and I can notice, okay, well that one shape though can be broken down into more than one shape now. So I can have this shape as well. The same thing, this bit here is this kind of boxy kind of shape. But when I break it down, I'll notice, this bit's got like a bit cut out of it where the camera, where the actual screen attaches. I've got lots of useful information here. But also you can see how a lot of these shapes, when you break them down, are duplicated. They're all the same shape. You've got lots of cylinders happening here. You break that down, you've got lots of cylinders. So once you start modeling one part of it, there's a good chance you can just use the same part of it again somewhere else on the model to save you time. Maya's also got some new built-in shapes that will help us with things like, I don't know if you can see here, see how this got, it's almost like a little gear shape. Well, Maya now has got a built-in gear primitive, so we're not even going to have to worry too much about modeling that, because we can just use the primitive of that. But the most important thing is to gather your reference, have a good look at it, draw over it if need be, and break down the forms that make up the whole object, break them down into smaller parts that are more manageable. So, looking at this, I'm going to start, well, I'll keep the, where's my front view? Do I have a front view? Yeah, I do, yeah. So I'm going to keep that open, but I'm also going to load it into Maya as well. So hopefully Maya's started up by now. Now as I go through this, I'm going to, anytime I do something on this, I'm going to say what I'm doing. It'll get picked up by the microphone. It's all being recorded. So when you look back at it again, you should be able to see what's happening. But I just want to, I'll be talking through pretty much everything that I'm doing. If you feel unsure, if you think I've skipped over a bit, then just stick your hand up and ask a question. I don't mind, okay? So, let's start trying to model this camera. Right, the first thing I want to do is I want to go to a top viewport and a front viewport, and I want to load some images into those viewports so I can kind of almost trace over what I'm doing. The way I'm going from Maya will probably start up with one big window in our perspective window here. We just have to tap spacebar and that will take us to 4 windows, and you can see top, front and side written just here, right? If we want to load an image in, I just want to say, Anton, by the way, you don't have to follow along when I'm doing this, right? This bit is just watch. So because if you're trying to follow along and you miss a bit, then it's just going to get all chaotic, right? So top viewport, if I want to load in an image, I go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. And now I have to go to where my images are. And I stored my images in Pictures. And I called it Lumix Camera. Let's find the top. Yeah, there's the top. So let's select the top one, press open, and then that gets loaded in. And that has literally created a little plane here with that texture on it. I'm going to do the same with the front viewport. I'm going to go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. Back to my pictures. This time I'm going to load the front one in. Now, if you want to be totally accurate when you're doing this, you would take your photos with a tripod and you would make sure that you were exactly bang on front view, and you'd make sure you were exactly looking overhead, and then you would bring them into Photoshop and you would further kind of resize these images to make sure that they matched up in the viewport. That's if you want to, if you're modeling something and it has an accuracy is absolutely vital, then you'd want to do that. If you're doing something where you don't have to be 100% accurate, then doing it this way is fine. You're going to use this more as a guide rather than something to completely kind of trace over. This just gets us in the right ballpark, okay? So we created 2 images in here, our reference images. They show up in here in this outliner, which is the outliner, remember, is simply like a list of all things in your scene. And we press this button to hide or show the outliner. And our planes, whenever we select something in the viewport, it gets highlighted in the outliner. And whenever you select something in the outliner, it gets highlighted in the viewport. So it all synchronizes up. And you can hide these planes just as you can hide any object using Control-H to hide, and then selecting it in the outliner and Shift-H to bring it back. But we don't want to worry too much about that at the moment. What we want to start doing now is start modeling this camera. So I'm going to start with the top viewport. with my mouse hovering over the viewport, I'm going to tap space, and that maximizes it. So now I'm only looking through the top viewport. I'm going to start off modeling this using a cube. So our cube, just tap that and the cube appears. Remember the keys for moving stuff around. W lets us move. E lets us rotate. R lets us scale. And then if we want to, we're looking at this in shaded view at the moment, so I can't see through this cube. But if I want to see through the cube to the image below, then I'll press number 4, which will turn this into wireframe mode, where shading doesn't happen. And this is what I want it to be like at the moment. So I'm going to position the cube at the end, just here. And I'm going to hold down the right mouse button. And this shows us the components of the cube. You can kind of ignore vertex face, you can ignore UV, and you can ignore multi for now. All we're really interested in are the edge, vertex, and face. Let's go to vertex, and we can see 4 little vertices showing up, although that's only 4 because we're looking at it top down. All the vertices are there to manipulate and move. Now I want to resize this cube so it's roughly the same dimensions as the top of the camera. So I'm going to click and hold left mouse button and drag a rectangle over these 2 vertices. What I've actually got is 4 vertices, but you just can't see them because we're looking straight down. I'm still in move mode. I can switch to rotate or scale, but I want to stay in move mode, right? I want to just move these across to here, so it's roughly the right width. Now I want to make it the right sort of depth. So again, I'm going to drag like that and select these. I'm going to move them to about there. And I'm going to do the same for the front. Move it to about there. So now my rectangle is about the right kind of shape. I'm going to tap space, which brings us back to all 4. Now I'm going to move into the front viewport. I'm going to resize my cube so that it's the right size. Although, actually, you can't see my cube at the moment because the image plane, I think, is in the way. So I'm going to select the image plane. Yeah, I'm going to move that image plane back a little bit. So now I can see my object over the top of there. All I did was select the image plane and move it a bit. Okay, mouse cursor back in here, tap spacebar. That's my cube. So I got the right rough kind of width, but it's not the right height at the moment. So to begin with, I'm just going to move that down to about there. I'll switch to wireframe again by pressing 4. Hold down the right mouse button to bring up this. Our component selection. Again, select vertex. Drag those top ones and lift them up. And I'm not going to bring it right to the top. I'm going to bring it to just below. I'm going to bring it to where this kind of line is, because I'm going to do something to kind of make this wedge shape a bit later. So I'm just going to bring it to about there. Press tap. So now we've got a cubey box here, or a boxy cube, or just a kind of box that's about the right dimensions as the camera. So I'm always looking at the image in the background. Every now and again I'll go back to Photoshop, have a look maybe at one of these 3/4 views, make sure that it's all looking okay there as well. So we're back to here, right? Let's go back to the top viewport. So this is about the right size and width, but the actual camera has a kind of curved kind of feel to it. So how do we get that kind of curved feel? We're going to have to add in some more edges. And by adding in more edges, we'll be adding in more vertices, which will allow us to shape this into more this kind of shape. We want to remember to only add edges where we're going to need them. We don't want to start adding edges all over the place, because every edge that you add is going to make it... It's less these days to do with making your model too heavy. That's less of a worry. It's much more these days that every new edge you add is a new thing you've got to bear in mind, and it's going to catch you out later when you're moving it and modeling. So if you keep your model as simple as possible, it's going to be much easier to work with. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, what edges do I need to add so I can get roughly this curved kind of shape? I'm going to go to our modeling toolkit over here. Remember this, we've got our channel box. If it's missing, then it's just been clicked. You just have to click it again. We have channel box, modeling toolkit, and attribute editor. We're going to be working mostly with the modeling toolkit. And we're only going to be using, I think we're only going to be using almost one actual command in here. We might use bevel, but it's mostly multi-cut we're going to use. Multi-cut lets you cut and model up in a whole load of different ways. You can click on an edge and start cutting lines into it. You can click on a vertex and start adding lines into it. Or what we're going to do, we're going to hold down Control, which switches it to the edge loop mode. And we're going to add an edge loop. We're going to add an edge loop there, right across the middle. Just by holding Control, click. We've got one, so that's added an entire edge across the middle. It's done more than that actually. It's added an edge that runs all the way around, hence the word edge loop. So that edge goes all the way around the object. I also want to add an edge here, so I can kind of form this curve. So I'm going to add an edge about there. I'm going to add another one about here. I'm not massively worried about total accuracy at the moment. Click that off. We're no longer using multi-cut at the moment. So now I've added one edge across here and two edges around here. This will allow me to select that set of vertices, and if I hold Shift, that set of vertices as well. Now I've got them both selected. If I was to not hold Shift, I would select that bunch of vertices, and if I tried to select this bunch, it would just switch selection. Like a lot of things in computers, same in Photoshop when you're doing masks and things like that. Shift is almost like the universal add to selection, and it works the same in 3D. So I'm going to hold Shift and select both of these. I'm going to press W to move them, and then I'm going to just pull them down a bit, and then I'm going to scale them, press R. I'm going to scale them just in one axis, because if I just scale on one of these handles, then I'm only scaling in the X-axis if it's red, Z-axis if it's blue, and you can't see it, but the green one would be Y. If you scale it from here, then you're scaling it in all axes. If you're scaling it here, you're scaling it in just two axes. But if I just want one axis, because all I want to do is just bring these points inwards a little bit. So I'm just going to scale these in a little bit like that. And I'm going to do the same on these ones. Just going to scale them a little bit in. But then I'm also, on these ones, going to bring them a little bit closer in like this as well. But I'm going to switch to move and only move in the Z axis. Okay, so I've got this rough kind of shape now. Press space to come back to 4 views. Press space again while my cursor's in the perspective, and now I can see, okay, that's the rough shape of the camera. I'm going to right click and go to object mode. I'm going to do another keyboard shortcut here. You can either write this down or look back at this later when you watch the video. Control and 1 does what we call isolates selection, which means it only shows the thing that you've got selected, which is very useful when you're working on complicated things or you've got a lot of things to work on. If you press Control 1 again, everything comes back. So I'm going to press Control 1. I'm also going to turn off Grid as well, which is up here. Just going to turn that off. And I'm going to look at that shape and go, okay, yeah, that looks roughly the right kind of shape. Still lots to add to it, but I'm on the right kind of the right track here. I'm just going to do just a few little things in here as well. You might like to switch these things on when you're working on it. They're just little visual improvements in the viewport that can sometimes make things just look, they add like a slight shadow, which can help when you're modeling. So to do that, you don't have to do this. This is not required at all. This is purely to make for a nicer visual experience when you're working. So you can go to Viewport 2.0, which is in Renderer, this little square box. This will bring up a menu. You scroll down here, screen space ambient occlusion, just tick that on. And anti-aliasing, just tick that on as well. Again, you don't have to do this, but you'll notice what happens when this is switched on, when two objects come together. A little shadow happens. It's kind of, just looks a bit nicer, a bit prettier. Okay, so we've got the rough shape okay. I'm also going to put on shading, wireframe on selected. What this does is, even when the object's not selected, it displays the wireframe, which is going to be very useful because we're going to be placing edges on this to help us know where we're going to split our object up. Anyway, press Control 1 again, bring everything back. So we've got the body of the camera there. What do we need to add next? Well, the big main thing is going to be that lens. Let's add that lens. That lens is just going to be a cylinder. That's all it's going to be. Press spacebar and let's create a cylinder. So it just creates a default cylinder here at 0, 0, 0 at the sort of origin. And we're gonna, what we're gonna do here, we're gonna do just a couple of things to this cylinder first. We're gonna go to the attribute editor. We're gonna go to poly cylinder. This has got way too many subdivisions in it. I don't want 20 subdivisions. I want 8 for now. I want a very basic cylinder. I'm going to, and we can close that attribute editor. And I'm going to Control 1 to isolate the selection. And I'm going to get rid of some of these edges here. I want this cylinder to be very basic. So I'm going to hold right mouse button, go to edge. I'm going to select that edge, every other edge essentially, that edge and that edge. And I'm going to do the same on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to get rid of these edges. Now the keyboard shortcut for doing this would be Control and Delete. But the equivalent of doing this is holding down Shift and right mouse button. And you see a bunch of different options here. I want to delete edge. But if you did Control and Delete, it would do exactly the same thing. It's worth getting used to memorizing some of the keyboard shortcuts because it'll speed your work up a lot. There's not too many keyboard shortcuts to remember. I'm just going to always repeat them as I do them, so hopefully after a while you remember them as well. Control 1 to bring everything back. And now initially all I want to do is I want to rotate this cylinder and put it into the right position and scale it up to the right kind of level. So I'm going to rotate it, pressing E. Now here's another keyboard shortcut. If you hold J while rotating, the object will rotate in kind of chunks, discrete chunks. I think these are 15 degrees, which means you can much easier rotate it straight down into a kind of 90-degree angle. If you don't hold down J, it's kind of like that. And when you get to 90 degrees, well, that's sort of roughly 90 degrees. It looks 90 degrees, but it's not actually 90 degrees. And when you're doing this, the more strict you are with yourselves at the beginning by rotating stuff and snapping stuff, then the less you're going to get confused later on, and the less things are going to catch you out. So if you hold J while rotating, it's going to snap it nicely and rotate it in little increments. So I've rotated it. I'm going to W to move it into roughly the right position. And now I want to scale it up. So press R. And initially, I only want to scale it in 2 axes. So I'm going to use this little square. If I scaled it in just that one, I'm going to get squished. I'm going to get an oval. Same with that. But if I scale it here using that one, both X and Y are going to scale at the same time. So I'm just going to scale this up to roughly the right amount. Press space. There we go. I'm going to hide this image plane by pressing Control H so I can see this better. Actually, this will show off as well what that little setting in render viewport, what that did, it's now added a little shadow that will appear as you bring objects closer to each other. That little shadow appears, and that can just be handy if you want to make sure things are touching or not intersecting, or it just gives you a little visual cue as to where things are. Okay, so I think this is almost the right scale. I think probably scale it down a little bit. And then let's have a look at the top viewport again. Shift H, that comes back. Here we go. And now I want to scale this so I'm in roughly the right ballpark here. So to scale it from the base, let's do that pivot point thing that we've done in the past. And to reiterate, what we do with that is we press Insert, which changes us to pivot point mode. Now I hold the V key, which means the pivot is now going to snap to points. It's going to snap to any point that it sees. So I'm going to move it around, and you can see it's snapping to these points, which is extremely useful for when we want to scale from the base of an object or the side of an object. So I'm going to move it to just here. Holding V, moving this around, let go. Quite important to remember that I've got to press Insert again to get myself out of pivot mode. Now when I scale, I'm going to be scaling from that base just here, which is a lot more useful. Now I can scale out. I'm just going to bring it to roughly where the lens is. Okay. So far so good. We've got a very basic looking camera kind of going on. This is kind of what you call the block out kind of phase. This is something where you don't have to worry about lots and lots of intricate modeling operations. It's a good idea to just block out those general shapes right near the beginning, going back to your reference, looking at it, thinking, yeah, that's working, that's looking roughly right. If I block it out, that looks good. Now, I'm going to start adding some stuff to this camera body that's going to help us later deal with this line here, because we're going to end up splitting the camera, separating the bottom part from the top part here, because they're different. This bit bevels out slightly, it's got this bit that comes up. It's a different kind of material anyway, so if we were going to texture it, we might end up putting a different material on here. We want to prepare ourselves for that. So we're just going to put an edge where that is. I'm going to press space, come back to this. We got a nice, we can see through it, so we know where that line's got to go. So we bring back the modeling toolkit by pressing that little tab. Back down to multi-cut, which again we use over and over and over again. Press Control, move it up and down. Okay, that's going to be roughly where that line is. So I'm just going to click. I'm not going to do anything to it at the moment. I'm just going to leave it as it is. Click multi-cut off, like that. Now, what next? Let's start thinking about bringing this bit up here, because this is a big part of it is this bit that kind of raises up. How should we do that? Let's add another line in. In fact, no, actually, I know what we can do first. Because anything we now do to this top part, with this shape here and where these buttons go, isn't really anything to do with this bottom part anymore. I want to be free to be able to adapt and change this top part without having any kind of knock-on effect to this bottom part. So I want to split this section from this section. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go and hold right mouse button initially, I think, to go back to object view. I'm in perspective view at the moment, so I'm going to press Control 1 and then I hit spacebar just to maximize that. So what I want to do is I want to take this top whole section off of this section just here. So that's easy enough to do. Right mouse button. All I've got to do is select the faces that make up this top part. So I'm holding Shift and drawing and just clicking them. If I wanted to, I could look at it from that sort of front angle and I could just draw a rectangle and select them all in one go, like that. But if you're doing it one by one, you can just select one, hold Shift, add to your selection, like that. But The gist of it is, there you go. I've selected all those polygons. Now I want to detach them from this bit. So you go up to Edit Mesh, come all the way down here, Extract. Let's click this little square box that will bring up the menu. By default, it's going to do exactly what I want it to do. It's going to have this separate extracted faces. If you don't have that on, it'll detach these polygons from these polygons, but it won't make a separate object. We want two separate objects. So those faces selected, Edit Mesh, Extract. I'm just going to click it now, and it's done it. You've got a couple of options here, offset, local translate. We don't have to worry about that. What it's got done over here, it's created this pcube1, which is the name of our original cube that we made this out of. And underneath this, we now have two polygonal surfaces, the top part and the bottom part. These are two completely separate objects now. So I'm going to continue working on this top part. Bring everything back like that. Okay, so object mode. Let's see, where should we add some lines to get this to kind of work? Well, I think we need a line just there for sure. So let's go to multi-cut and put a line just there. Now let's extrude. We'll untick that. We're going to extrude these faces upwards to make this shape. So we'll select 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to just maximize this window by pressing space. W lets us move those polygons, but if we hold shift while moving them, then that extrudes up some extra geo. So we can pull this up a bit, let go of shift, let go of moving it, and we've got that kind of shape. Press space once to come back out to 4 views, space back in here. Now we see we've moved it up too much, so we just shift it back down a bit. And we want to create that kind of shape. Well, that's easy enough to do. Let's move to vertex, right mouse button, vertex, select these vertices and just move them across like that. Back to object mode. Now we're getting closer towards that camera shape. What can we do with this lens to make it look a bit more realistic? Well, this is a whole bunch of extrusions actually that we can make this complicated looking lens shape with lots of sort of indentations coming along really easily. So again, I'm going to select that lens, go to face, select each one of those front faces. I'm going to move it back, and as I move it back in this viewport I can see how that's moving, and I can bring it all the way back to like the first kind of bit just there. Let's have a look at the photo. We can see it kind of comes in and it comes out, then goes in, then goes back out, moves along. Well, that's easy enough to do. We can do that straight away by just doing a whole bunch of extrusions on these 4 faces. So I've got these 4 faces, they're still selected. I'm going to press space so I can come into here just to get an idea. So again, I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to pull out another set of faces. Press space bar, you can see, look, that's pulled out that set. But these kind of like, they slope in a little bit. So I'm going to go to R, scale, and I'm going to scale them uniformly by going to that central dot. It means X, Y, and Z are all going to get scaled at the same time. I can do it in this viewport 2, or I can do it in this viewport. So I'm just going to shift them in a little bit, like that, to make that shape. I'm not going to deselect, I'm just going to go straight back to W to move, and again I'm going to do another extrusion by holding shift, just pulling them out a teeny little bit. Then I'm going to do another extrusion, but this time I'm going to do it while scaling. So I'm going to change to scale mode R, hold down Shift, and then scale it up a bit. Then I'm going to go back to Move, and I'll do another extrude, and hopefully you can just begin to see what's happening here. Just building up those kind of indentations. I'm going to scale these up just a tiny bit. Back to Move, hold Shift, extrude these. We've got a little sort of indentation running down the middle of this. We could do that in a number of ways, but let's try and actually just model it in right now. Again, we'll do it just by doing this extrusion method. So I've got to this point, go to R to scale, hold Shift, scale inwards a bit. Back to Move, hold Shift, extrude, just pull it the tiniest amount. Back to R, which is scale, again hold Shift and extrude that bit out. But this time I'm going to try and extrude it out to the same amount as it was before it extruded in. Back to Move, hold Shift, pull it out, just there. R again for scale, hold Shift. Back to Move. And then I'm just going to finish off this shape using that same kind of method. Okay, so I get my lens shape here, and it's got a lot of interesting stuff where it kind of goes in and out, and it's got this nice little sort of indentation in the middle just here. Again, we're just blocking it out. Let's deselect that. Right, so that's what that looks like now. I've got separate object here, separate object here, and here. One of the things that makes models look really good, and one of the things you should always be thinking of, are edges. If we just leave the edges like they are at the moment, they're too sharp, they're too hard. Even a sharp edge, even an edge that appears sharp, has some slight bevel to it. So even these sharp, so-called sharp edges on the side of this camera, you can see how they've got a bevel and how it catches the light. That's almost one of the secrets to making your 3D models look good, is if you start adding these bevels on. Now what makes it maybe a bit complicated is that we're going to be smoothing this, because at the moment this is way too angular. It's not, hasn't got a nice curve to it like the actual camera does. But we don't have to model in every single line to get that smoothness. We can let Maya do some of that work for us by smoothing it. But smoothing adds can catch you out. You have to bear a couple of things in mind. If you want to see what the object looks like smoothed, remember that you press 3. That will smooth the object selected. Let's hide these image planes for now. So Control H and Control H. So if we smooth everything we've got here, doesn't look, you know, our hard edges aren't there. It's all too blobby. So there's a bunch of stuff that's just hopefully going to become second nature to you when you do this a lot, is to add what we call supporting edge loops. And all supporting edge loops do is help tighten up where we want sharp corners and edges to be. Think of these edge loops as being like a bit of a magnet. They pull detail towards where these edge loops are. The best way to show this is to demonstrate it. You can add a supporting edge loop in a whole bunch of different ways. Let's show you. And sometimes you'll need to do it one way, and sometimes that way won't work for other ways, other kind of situations. So at the moment, when we press 3, this object gets too blobby down here. What we want is we want this to be smooth, but we want this to be fairly hard edged. So again, we go back to our trusted multi-cut, click that, hold down Control, and we can add in a supporting loop just here. If I unclick that, now let's see what happens when I hit 3 now. Now It's a lot sharper down the bottom. It's not blobby. That loop has helped us maintain a sharper edge. Press 1 again to go back to... all this 3 is, by the way, this is just a preview mode. This isn't what your object actually is like at the moment. This just will show you what your object will look like when it's smoothed. You have to do one extra step to actually make it smoothed. But it's very handy to know that 1, completely unsmoothed, 2 is smooth, but I can see the ghostly outline of my actual object. 3, I'll see what the object looks like smooth without my sort of the cage, as they call it. They call this a cage. We can, I think this needs actually one more edge loop to properly tighten up this corner. And the way we can do that, another way of potentially adding an edge loop is to select faces 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 and extrude these, but extruding while holding down shift, well yeah, shift sorry is what extrudes, but extrude them in scaling mode. So select the faces, then I hold down shift, which means I'm in extrude mode, and I'm just going to extrude them in X and Y by a very small amount, just so they sort of pull in a little bit like that. And I might have to adjust that as well, because I've got too much of a border around here and not enough of a border around here. So once I've extruded that, I can now take my finger off shift and I can scale in X and Y individually, or X and Z in this case, just to make this a little bit more even. You see what I'm going for here? I'm going for a neat, even, extra line of polygons going around there. So I've got a supporting edge loop here and another one going around. So now if I look at that in smoothing mode or smooth preview mode, I've got a nice sharp edge just here. Just going to turn wireframe on shading off briefly. That's what I want. So all the advantages of it being nice and smooth without me having to actually physically add in any extra edges, but with the advantages that I can also sharpen off this. You want to be doing this on virtually every single part of every model you make. Certainly if you're modeling what we call hard surface modeling, which means anything that isn't a creature or isn't like something in nature. Anything human made, you're going to want to put bevels on all the sharp corners. All the hard edges should never be 100% sharp. They should always have some kind of bevel on them. Now you can do this with bevel. You can select edges and hit bevel, and I urge you to have a mess around with that and play with that and see how that works. You get a few different options. You get a bunch of stuff for free and a little bit more one click with that, but you have a few issues with that as well, because it can mess up your topology. And what topology is the way the lines are laid out on your model. The more chaotic these lines get, the more there are lines where you haven't intended to put them, the more difficulty you're going to have as you go along adding to your model and adapting it and changing it and fixing it where it's gone wrong. Beveling can potentially add those problems in, but it can also make your life a lot easier and adds options. But you can always do it manually using this multi-cut as well. Okay, so we've done the base. Let's do this. What are we going to do? One more thing as well. This is another tip, I guess, just a general tip when you're doing hard surface modeling or machinery or anything kind of human made, where you've got two parts of an object that are kind of glued together or they form a part of the larger object. There'll always be some kind of bevel or indentation where these two things meet. If I load up, let's have a look. Oh yeah, this is a good example. So this part of the object here is technically a different bit of plastic from this part, but it all forms the same overall shape. What makes this look nice is that there's the smallest of bevel. You can see where the highlight gets picked up there. So any kind of crease or seam that you have, you ideally want to put some kind of bevel where they meet up. If you do that, you'll find that your models just look that bit more pleasing. They look more realistic. They don't look as harsh because when they're lit, the light can play across that indentation rather than just have completely different values. If a light was shining on this object, this edge here is just perfectly sharp. So there's going to be no highlight along this edge. It's just going to be one level of lighting here, another level of lighting here. There's going to be no gradation of shading, no specular, no shininess happening here, which you would expect to happen in real life. So to make these two parts here, this part and this part, match up and meet each other in a more pleasing way, we're going to add an edge loop along this top edge as well. And I'm just going to do it for you and show you. So it's very straightforward. We're going to select all these edges, and that will allow me to show you another sort of shortcut. If you want to select a loop of edges and all these edges connect, all you have to do is double click them. Double click one edge and it will select an entire loop that that edge is connected to. We can extrude these edges. We can bring these edges in a whole bunch of different ways, but to try and for now as well keep it simple in terms of only using like a handful of actual commands, we'll use that holding down shift method. So we're still on scaling mode, that's cool. We'll hold down shift and we'll scale it once in a little bit that way. So that's just a little bit in Z. Let go. Now I'm not going to hold down shift again now, because if I was to hold down shift again, it would extrude another set of edges. I've extruded the edges I want, and I've scaled them a little bit in Z. Now I'm going to scale them a little bit in X, so I get that kind of thing happening. A little bit of a lip forming around here. That's still not going to be enough to get that nice kind of beveled edge, because if I try smoothing that at the moment, again, it's going to turn this to being very soft. I get very, very soft, and it also almost pulls a little bit of the profile in too much. So I want to add another supporting edge loop, which is going to do that thing of where it effectively tightens up, sharpens up the edge. Back to multi-cut then. Hold down Control. Let's put a supporting edge loop just there. And we'll do one more on this side here, just there. So we've got an extra loop running around the kind of flat part of that, and another loop running around the vertical part of that. And what that gives us, in smoothing mode, pressing 3 again, is a nice smooth object around here, but it's got the barest hint of a little bevel going on just here. Right, I'm going to call that bit done for now. Press 1, Control 1, sorry, bring everything back. Now let's do this bit. This bit's got a bunch of challenges, because this has got bits where we want it to be smooth and bits where we want it to be nice and hard edged, but it's exactly the same techniques that we used here. We just got to use them with a little bit more thought, a little bit of experimentation. Let's do the easy bit first. Well, let me think actually. No, let's do the bit to sharpen up this. So Control 1, let's just look at this on its own. So when we press 3, that's the kind of shape we get, which is not the shape we want. Hasn't got yeah, that's the bit. Hasn't got that feel to it. How do we get that? Well, it's just a matter of adding those edge loops in to the right place. And I think this is the bit where you've just got to do this. You've got to practice this to get a feel for where these edge loops should be placed. Multi-cut. Let's go to multi-cut. Well, that bit's a hard edge. That bit's a hard-ish kind of edge. Front view might show this better. In fact, if we switch this off, let's find a better view. Oh no, that'll do, yeah. So we've got a hardish edge there. Both of these kind of hard edges. Right. So we're just going to put some edge loops where we want it to be a little bit harder. So put one there. And let's put one just here. This will be a good, actually this will show a good something worth looking at. So put one there. But you notice what that edge loop has done? It's kind of followed the contours around. So we've got the loop here where we want it, but we don't necessarily want this kind of stuff to go on. So let's kind of straighten that out. We don't want that. Let's go to wireframe view. We can straighten that out by, let's go to edge. We can select that edge and that edge. Press W to move. And let's kind of shift this along just here. Like that. Let's see what happens when we press smooth now. Okay, we're getting the kind of edge here, but we're not quite there yet anymore, and we still feels too blobby. You know, it's still too smooth around here. A lot of modeling is problem solving. Trying something, it might not work, and you might have to scratch what you did for the last 10-15 minutes and give it another go, try a different approach. I'm going to create another edge going down here to sort of support this edge. I'm going to use multicut again, but instead of using edge loop, instead this time I'm going to not press any kind of button on the keyboard. I'm just going to hover this around, and when this lights up here, it's going to connect an edge to this vertex. It's going to go like that. Hold on. Control Z. And I'm going to add a loop down here like that. When I'm happy with it, I press return. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Okay. What can we do to stop it being too smooth around here when we press 3? Again, it's a matter of adding edge loops. Actually, we'll add that one where we kind of, instead of adding an edge loop, we select all these faces, holding shift to add to selection. Actually, I just want to be in face mode only for this. And let's try that method of scaling. This might work, it might not. So let's hold down shift so it extrudes. We'll extrude it in a bit like that. And then taking fingers off shift, we'll extrude it a tiny bit inwards like that. Again, we're going to quickly go to smooth mode, see what that looks like. Ah, we're getting there. That's now more like that kind of shape. So we've got it smooth around these sides where we want it to be, but it's kind of sharp where it's going down here. Let's see if we can get that even better. Back to 1. Now I'm thinking we probably need another supporting edge loop, but this one might cause us problems. Yeah, because it wants to end at a certain point there. What can we do? We can add one here. Can add one here, and maybe we can connect up some points, because where at all possible we want to have it so we're just dealing with polygons that have 4 sides if possible. So we're using a multicut to connect. Oops. I needed to press return on that to say yes, that's where I want it. And one down here. Yeah, that's where I want it. We might need to delete some edges here as well. So let's get rid of this. Let's do Control Delete. We're going to end up with some polygons that aren't optimal. Ideally, you don't want polygons that have more than 4 sides. But as I said, you're going to find this a lot with modelling. You'll start adding detail and something might go wrong and you might have to go back a bit to fix it. have a look. Okay, yeah. We've got a sharper edge around here. We've got a nice kind of shape here. We'll do that one more bit on this one. We'll create that kind of lip, that sort of bevel where it meets up with the other piece. We'll go to Edge, double click and select all of that loop of polygons. And we'll scale extrude. Again, it's the scale tool. Press Shift, move that in a little bit. Let go of Shift, move that little bit in. And again, we'll add some more edge loops to sort of tighten up this point. One there, one there. Let's press Control 1 to bring everything back. Now, when we smooth these two now at the same time, when these are both smoothed, they should perfectly match up because they initially started out as the same model and we split them apart. But let's select them. So now we've got this nice seam that runs across here. And it looks like this thing was kind of manufactured to fit correctly. And that is kind of the gist of it. If we smooth this, there's a bunch of stuff we need to do to make this lens work better. Let's just do a little bit of a few bits and bobs on this lens to make it kind of fit better and make it look like it's all same part of the same part. So the one thing that we definitely don't need on this lens is where it connects up with the camera. We don't need any polygons. They're wasted there and they're just going to confuse the smoothing. So if we just select these polygons here, we can just delete them. And now when this smooths, it should look a bit better. But it's still too sort of blobby. Looks too organic. So we've got to just do what we did with this one. We've got to add what's called supporting edge loops. Where we want these transitions to be hard, we add an edge loop or two. So I'll do this and then you can begin to experiment yourself doing this. So I'm going to do it again. Multi-cut. Hold down Shift. I want this edge to be fairly sharp, so I'm going to add two edge loops just here. Let's try it smooth and see what happens. It's a harder edge now. See what it looks like? Without those edge loops, it's all softer. But if I Control Y, isn't it? Control Y, if I add those edge loops in, you can see how that pinches it up and makes this sharper. And that's all it is. 90% of modeling is doing this kind of stuff. So extruding stuff and adding edge loops where needed to make things sharper. The pain is when you start adding edge loops that are going to contradict and conflict with other bits you want to model. Or you accidentally add too many. It can be a pain taking stuff away. Much easier to add stuff. So that's why you've got to kind of be careful when you add stuff. Let's just... Oops. Isolate this. Control 1 to isolate this. Let's put some edge loops there. Let's put an edge loop here. We definitely want some edge loops here when this is very, very sharp indentation. One there. You can zoom in. One there. One there. Now, as I said, you could do this using the bevel command, but the bevel command will start off with a preset value in its fraction, and when you're dealing with these tiny little distances here, that fraction is going to be too big and it might explode your mesh a little bit and be initially confusing as to what it's doing. So I would say initially start off adding this stuff manually. Another one just there, here, and here. Definitely want one there, and there. And this definitely has to have one because it's kind of like a 90-degree angle. If I want to maintain that 90-degree angle when it smooths, I'm definitely going to need an edge loop there and one there. And the closer your edge is to the angle, to the edge that you want to... sorry, let me say that again. Let me just Control Z this. We want to maintain this angle. We want this to look sharp. So if I go smooth, at the moment, that is not sharp at all. It's very soft. Because what it's trying to do when it's smooth, it's trying to average out the angles between here, through there, and through here. So you get this very, very smooth, soft angle that happens. And so when you add an extra edge loop in, it's magnetizing that smoothing towards that extra edge you've added in. Now, to get a tighter angle, you want that line to be closer. That extra supporting loop has to be closer to the angle you're trying to keep. The further you move this line away, the less tight that angle is going to be, and the more smooth it's going to continue to be. Let me just show you. So if I put an extra loop in here and a loop in here, it's going to be a little bit sharper than it was, as you see, but it's still not that sharp because my loops aren't that close to the actual edge I want. Let's Control Z that. If I put my loops in a bit closer, let's put them in a bit closer, but not massively close yet. One there and one there. Now if I smooth it, it's that bit tighter still. Still looks a bit blobby, so you can see how close to the desired sort of right angle that you want to maintain those loops have to be. So let's go back to that. Control Z, undo that again. Right, now let's add those loops in. So I want to have a really sharp, tight angle. I want this angle to continue to be really sharp. So this time I'm going to put my loops in really close to it. They're really tight, like that. Now when I smooth it, I get this really sharp angle. But importantly, it might be really sharp, but it's not perfectly sharp. There is still a very, very slight bevel there, and that's going to capture. It's going to catch the light, and it's going to catch reflections, and it's going to be the thing that makes your model look more realistic. You can see the influence that adding those other loops has had on the rest of the lens. It's sharpened all these bits where I want it to be sharp. I think this bit may be still a bit too soft, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a supporting loop to make this kind of like angle here. It goes this bit to this bit. I still want to have that bit being a bit sharp, so I'm going to add in another loop there. So again, this is what it looks like smooth. It's just that little bit too soft. Let's add in an extra loop. Just there. And another one just there. In general, again, you normally want to add in a supporting loop on either side of those angles that you want to preserve. Multi-cut off. Now let's look at that as smoothed. There, it's much sharper. But it's just brought my attention to this bit as well. I want that to be a bit sharper as well. I think that's just a little bit too smooth. So I think another loop has to be added just here to give me that sort of straight 45-degree angle, 90-degree angle kind of feel to it. So I've added one more loop, this one just here. Press 3. Let's get out of object mode. Yeah, that's what I want. Hopefully you can see this is a lot of the same kind of commands being added over and over again. Let's just finish up here with this end part of the lens cap. Again, I'll create an edge loop using that sort of extrusion method this time, where we select the faces here, we go to scale, and again we hold shift, and we just extrude that in a tiny, tiny wee little bit like that, which effectively creates another edge loop. And then let's add a supporting edge loop on the other side, like that. So now what we should have is this should look nice and flat and not sort of blobby at all. Yeah. There we go. Oh, I just think there's one more bit actually again. This is again lots of looking back at your stuff. Yeah, I've missed one out. There's no supporting edge loops here, so that gets too soft. Easy to fix. We add in our supporting loops, one there and one there. Press 3 to smooth, or to look at it smooth anyway. That's more like it. So that lens that initially looks quite complicated is all made out of one cylinder, and all I've done to that cylinder is extrude the front faces and then add in what they call supporting edge loops by using multi-cut and holding control and putting an edge loop on either side of a sharp angle that I want to preserve. I think that's the best way I can think to describe it at the moment. So let's smooth the lens out. And there's the camera. So we're getting there. I'm going to turn it over to you now in a moment, and I want you to have a go at doing this. The photos for the camera are on Blackboard. They are in. Should we go to IntroToCG, Learning Materials, and then right down at the bottom is this modelling reference photos example. In there are the pictures of the camera. So my advice to you would be to load them up into Photoshop, those pictures, for now, so you can quickly jump back and forth across and have a look. I will start to model some of the other parts to this camera, but I won't take it too far, and then I'll come round and if you need any help, any advice, got any concerns, then any clarifications, then I can help you. I'm going to stop the recording as well,